crazy stuff. So I had a video backlog on my phone for a long time, for several weeks. I used up all my disk space, and anyway, I didn't have any space to make a video, and I'm trying to cut in traffic here, I'm trying to be polite about it. Anyway, so I couldn't make any videos. So all along I'm thinking about all these videos that I want to make, but I couldn't make them because I had my phone all backed up, all the disk space all backed up with stuff. So finally I have it unblocked, unbacklogged, unbacked up, unused. I don't have that much disk space. I think I only have 25 gigabytes. That's like nothing, right? I need to get disk expansion. I need to get technically enhanced here. My battery's always dying. Disk space is always running out. Especially if I'm going to be doing videos. I need to get a mic too, because if I do a video outside, the wind blows across the microphone. It makes all that white noise, background white noise that basically overpowers whatever you're trying to say. So anyway, a lot of things to do. People make fun of social media, which is fine. I don't begrudge that. I understand where they're coming from. I mean, different people have different focus. What would be the right way to say that? Different people have different foci, right? Does that mean I'm Latin enabled when I know the plural of words like focus? As opposed to saying focuses, I say foci. Anyway, I'll try not to digress too much. But it is interesting to me that when you go to the dictionary and you look for the plural of words like, for example, focus or curricula. Curricula actually is not a good example, but there are other words I can't think of right now. It'll have like the official, legitimate Latin version of the plural word, but then it'll also have like the English-fied version, like for example, and I don't even know if focus is a good example or not. I'm just assuming that it is. It'll also have like the English-fied, popularized version of so it'll say foci and focuses, and either are equally appropriate. So that just speaks to the dynamic nature of language. It's always changing. I hear people all the time, like when I was growing up, it was always, would you like to go with Susie and me? That was the proper way to say that sentence. Now it's everywhere. Would you like to go with Susie and I? Would you like to go with John and I? Would you like, even on Joy FM, there's a guy who is on there who is stereotypically known to be academically inclined, and he has like a big word of the day thing, and even he was saying something like this debate was between my son and I, and I'm like, that's not proper grammar, bro. It's between my son and me. That's proper grammar. But everything is and I, and I, and I. And from my point of view, where I sit, it just became too complicated for people, and they got frustrated because people would say you shouldn't say and me, you should say and I. And so people just start saying and I all the time. And it's like, well, no, there's a time to say and I, and there's a time to say and me, and it's not that complicated. But so anyway, point is that popular culture, popular use, popular usage, maybe it just changed the rule. It's possible. I think that's kind of cool, actually. I kind of like that. I like it that rules can be bent. I like that. I think it would be helpful if when you're bending a rule, you know you're bending a rule, I think that's probably optimal, because that way you can make a judgment call as to whether or not your bending of the rule is appropriate for a given situation. You know, I mean, I'm a huge fan of breaking rules. If A, you know there is a rule that governs what you're doing, B, you know you're breaking the rule, and C, you could make some kind of a case for the fact that there's an advantage. You know, in other words, your breaking of the rule is purposeful and constructive, as opposed to breaking a rule in ignorance or in a spirit of destruction. You know, obviously the latter is not desirable. But anyway, that was a pretty good digression, huh? So today, there's a bunch of things I want to talk about. I can't decide which to talk about first. So I'm going to digress a little bit more. What I'm going to do in order to decide, I'm going to say a quick prayer. And I'm going to ask the Lord Jesus Christ, God the Father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, creator of the heavens and earth, to tell me what he would like me to talk about. And before I start to talk about that, I'm going to digress a little bit more. And a subject that's pretty interesting to me, and of interest to me, and that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And it's like, well, how do you know when you pray? How do you know that the answer you get is the answer that God gave you? I mean, in other words, how do you distinguish between your imagination, right, and an actual answer to prayer? And in the beginning of this debate that I was having inside my own head, it was very frustrating. It was very stressful, because it's scary, right? You don't want to be a fanatic. You don't want to be a fool. And you don't want to think you're hearing something when you're not hearing something. I mean, that's what a fool is. You don't want to be a fanatic, somebody who says, oh, God told me, now I have to, drive home with my eyes closed, or something like that, right? I mean, 30 miles home with my eyes closed the entire way. Right? You don't want to be either one of those. One of those is a fool, and the other's a fanatic. In my experience, in my faith walk, for me, I don't know. I feel very comfortable now. I mean, this is like after 20 years. I feel comfortable, but I don't feel finished. And I think that's a very important. Personally, I think just that alone is a revelation in and of itself, right? Because comfort speaks to peace. So it's good to have peace. And the way of peace is God's way. Right? Right? I mean, it's a misstatement to say, if you're feeling stressed, then you know for a fact you're not on God's path. That's a misstatement, because sometimes God calls us into stressful situations. So I don't exactly know how to resolve that one quite yet. But with respect to this particular issue, I have to say that I feel quite comfortable, but also unfinished. Because I know that there's always somewhere else to go. I know that there's always some new caveat that I haven't discovered, hasn't been revealed to me. There's some new exception. There's some new rule that contrasts with an existing rule that has been revealed, So to me, that's cool. That's way cool, to be comfortable but unfinished, I don't ever want to be finished. My mother always she was a big fan of the idea of arriving. Oh, you've really arrived. And God bless my mother, I love her. She did a world of good for me. But But, you know, she also had her issues. She had some pretty significant issues. In a video that I haven't published yet, I described her as being a terror. And I will affirm that. Again, here, she was a terror. You know, she terrorized people. She terrorized me. She terrorized my kids. And yet at the same time, she did a world of good for all of us. So, but she was a big fan of this idea of arriving. Oh, you've really arrived. And I just used to, you know, when somebody says something that doesn't make sense, we have this instinctive reaction of squinting our eyes like, wait, what? And that was always my reaction, is like, wait, what? The idea of arriving to me is just like, it's like, it doesn't resonate with me at all. Like, no, I don't ever want to arrive. I don't ever want to finish. I always want to be on the journey, you know? And when I die, that'll just be, you know, me taking, you know, like sometimes, well, not sometimes, but whenever you go on a journey, you know, you always have the insignificant progress, and then there are moments of significant progress. You know, like, for example, you go from mile marker 249 to 250. Well, that's progress, but it's insignificant progress because you just have another mile marker to achieve immediately following that. And 1 mile marker is really not any distinctively different than any other mile marker, you know? But then you have progress where you cross the Continental Divide, you know, or you reach the foot of the Rockies or whatever. I mean, that's significant progress, you know? That's a moment, I guess you could say, of significant progress, you know? Noteworthy progress, you know? So, you know, when I die, that will be a day of noteworthy progress. From now to then, the days between now and then are just, you know, insignificant progress. They're just mile markers. You know, I'm sure there will be some significant events between now and then as well, but, you know, my point is that that day will be a day of very significant progress. Most notable progress, you know. And so it's cool, you know. You think about God being infinite, and, you know, so I'm doing my best to become an imitator of God, to follow God. Well, that means the journey is infinite, which implies to me that, you know, the life of a Christian, the journey from this life to the afterlife, to heaven, is the ultimate expression of that old saying, the journey is the destination, right? Heaven is the journey. Because if we're going to pursue God, if we're going to imitate God, if we're going to do our best to conform to the standards and the demands that God has called us to, and God is infinite, well then all of that must also be an infinite process, you know? So to me that's very exciting, you know? It's very exciting. It kind of reminds me of what T.D. Jakes said in a sermon recently, where he said, as a leader, when you face a difficult battle and come through it, the reward for that achievement is that you get to fight another battle. Right? I love that. That's awesome, and that to me is very congruous with all of these other ideas that I've been talking about today. I've made some videos encouraging people, exhorting people, Christians, you know, pew Christians like myself, non-titular people that don't have titles, you know, that don't have leadership titles. You know, I've been exhorting them and challenging them to challenge their titular leaders. You know, keep them honest, keep their feet to the fire. You know, because we've got to train them to enjoy the battles. A man who doesn't ever face a battle is a fat, lazy, slovenly, self-indulgent, comfort addicted man. And that is the last thing that we want our leaders to be. You know, the book of Isaiah describes these men, and this is not a direct quote, but it describes them as being, as living in houses with red paneled walls, cedar paneled walls. Cedar's red, you know. So cedar paneled walls, fat and greasy with olive oil. You know? So you know what? God has no respect for men that don't love a challenge. I don't believe God has any respect for men that get upset when people challenge them. Because let's face it, if somebody gets upset when they're challenged, isn't that the clearest possible marker that these men are not challenged very often? It's like a challenge is a foreign experience to them. It's like, you know, they start gobbling like a turkey, you know. What are you saying? Don't you know who I am? So it's all very interesting, and that was a huge digression, and I digressed into an area I don't even know where I am anymore. Oh, I was going to pray about what God wants me to talk about, and then I was going to say, how do you know when it's your imagination and when it's just, you know, when you're actually, okay. So here's the thing. Here's the conclusion that I've come to. Okay. God has 1,000 channels through which to communicate with us. Okay. He has channels through which to communicate with us that we don't even know exist. Imagination is one of those channels. So you have to take your imagination seriously, but you have to stop to consider or ask yourself the question: if God is frequently talking to you through your imagination, I would say there's an excellent chance that you're getting a little bit carried away with your imagination. Right? I mean, that's a sign, okay, that you're starting to sort of like veer off into cult land, you know, or cult leader land. Like you start to view yourself, because, you know, again, if he has 1,000 channels through which to communicate with you, why is he choosing this one channel over and over and over again? You know, that doesn't make any sense. You know, another channel is reason. You know, that's a big one right there. You know, God wasn't fooling around when he gave us the ability to reason. All right, so there's a big one. So another one is, you know, events, other people. I don't know about you, but there will be, I've had experiences when I see something, you know, and it's not the thing, you know, like a tree, the shape of a tree. I mean, it'd be something completely indistinct, you know, but it's very distinct because of when I see it and the state of my mind when I see it, you know. So, I mean, God can speak to us through, you know, visual cues like that. He can speak to us through, you know, again, you see, there's a precedent in history with the advisors of kings that they will say things like, well, on the way over here today, I saw an eagle flying above my head had a snake in its grasp, and that means that when you go to fight against this person, you're going to win, or whatever. I mean, there is that precedent that these were the counselors, the sages, the wise men, the satraps, whatever the specific lexicon for a given culture was, you know. These are the men that the king consulted for wisdom and guidance and direction, you know. And some of them, in some cases, like I said, some people get carried away with their imaginations. Sometimes, you know, these men got carried away with signs. They're called signs and wonders sometimes, you know. So that's another channel. You know, apparently we have a gland in our mind. It's called the pineal gland. The gland contains crystals, like our inner ear contains crystals. And supposedly the pineal gland is light sensitive. It's sensitive to light, so that effectively pineal gland is effectively like a cell phone antenna for our mind to the spirit world, to the spiritual realm. And the occult, apparently, from what I understand, the occult is obsessed with the pineal gland. The pineal gland looks like a pine cone. Again, I'm just going to keep saying apparently, because I don't want to give anyone the impression that I know something that I don't know. I'm only conveying things that I've heard. But the pineal gland apparently looks like a pine cone. So outside one of the prominent Freemason Bethels, or whatever they call their places of meeting and Satan worship, or whatever they do there, I don't know. But anyway, I think they worship Lucifer, or they look to Lucifer for guidance because they consider him to be an angel of light. That, again, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I understand to be the case. So they have a giant statue of a pine cone, but it's not a pine cone. It's a artistic rendering of the pineal gland. So it's like a sixth sense. Supposedly, also the third eye in the Hindu tradition is some kind of a reference to the pineal gland. So supposedly also there are many chemical elements in our diets that are specifically designed to calcify the pineal gland. That is to say, to disable, to kill the pineal gland, so that we lose our vertical connection to the spiritual realm, to God. And of course, if you redirect your connection, which is not a good idea, but people do it, I think. If you redirect your connection to the spiritual realm away from God into, how shall we say, somebody else, then that could be a very bad thing. But apparently, again, some people do it, and that's why the occult is purportedly so obsessed with the pineal gland, because they too want to have a connection to the spirit realm. It's just not what children of the light would consider the positive side of the spiritual realm. So that's the pineal gland. So that's one other channel that God has, and is it possible for us to distinguish between our imaginations and the pineal gland? Well, that's a very fine distinction, I would say. If you have the capacity to make that distinction, then I want to hear from you, because that is certainly well beyond me at this point in time. So I think, in my experience, that okay, one more channel. This is a biggie right here. This is a biggie. The biggest channel for me is the history of my life. That's I don't want to say the biggest, but that's the one that I give the most credence. I'll put it that way. And for my inspiration, I'll go back to David fighting Goliath on that one. Very powerful story. Very powerful story. Listen, the amazing thing, the church is so wrong. They are so wrong. The preachers are so sold out. They are so watered down. And there's a powerful verse about the preachers of our day. And it says that in the last days, people will come that have a form of godliness but lacking the power. These guys have no power. It's like they've given up their God-given gender. It's like they're spiritual transgenders. In the spiritual realm, they're like transgenders. They have no power. They have no masculinity. They have no spiritual masculinity. And I'll be in order to diffuse the impression, the accusation that is just pure insult without objective basis. I'll do my best to explain in more concrete, more objective terms what I mean. They refuse to acknowledge that there's a spiritual war going on, right? And for me, any man that does that is a spiritual transgender, is a man who is a spiritual transgender. Spiritually, he's a man who goes around dressed up, talking like and acting like something that he's not. He's a man, but he looks and acts and talks like a woman. Okay? He's given up his spiritual, God-given gender, you know? And obviously, it's a small step to go from there to coming to the conclusion that, well, if that is true, then, you know what, these guys are enablers and advancers and advocates and promoters of this whole transgender, gender confusion, 52 different genders, you know, in the physical realm, literal. They're enablers, okay? They're like halcyons. They're like markers. You know, like a ship follows a marker when it goes to sea. It's like they are a marker for that entire movement. Now, why is that bright light? Oh, there we go. That's just the sun over my shoulder. They're markers. If you spiritually deny your gender, you know what I'm trying to say. If spiritually speaking, you're not your own gender, your own God-given gender, then you're a marker for that very same thing, regardless of what it is. No, wait, I'm talking about gender confusion. If spiritually you have gender confusion, okay, that's going to be hard to wrap your head around, I get that. But I'm speaking in figurative, metaphorical terms here. You know, if you're a man, okay, sorry guys, you're just going to have to try to get what I'm saying. It might not even make sense, but it is what I'm saying. If you're a man, you know, biological man, you know, then I think that God has put a certain call on your life, not only in the physical realm, but in the spiritual realm as well. I guess that's what I'm really trying to say. I guess that's it, you know? So if you give that up in the spiritual realm, okay, then you become a marker, especially if you're a leader, you become a marker for those people who are taking that journey in the physical realm, you know? And you yourself have taken yourself a step closer to that, you know, taking that journey in the physical realm, you know? You might not ever take that next step, but, you know, you've taken a step in that direction, you know? So, now what was I talking about? So, yeah, I'm about to back my car right up into my patio. So how do we know? Blah, blah, blah. I was talking about all that. How can we distinguish between the Peniel? Oh, the story of our life. Okay, so David, right? When David, I don't know how I got off in that gender thing. I forgot. Anyway, David fought Goliath. And when he went to, okay, so the way, I know what I was going to say. The way the preachers talk about it, and by the way, the commentaries, I mean, the whole, man, there's so much to talk about. There's just so much to talk about. There's a great verse. It's Apostle Paul. I think I actually know this one. I think it's Romans 7:21. You got this verse is going to be powerful if you can internalize it and if you accept it. I think it's Romans 7:21. The Apostle Paul, who was a lawyer, that's very important in this case. He was a lawyer. And this is what he says. He says, I find this law at work. I mean, when a lawyer uses the word law, okay, you know he's not doing it lightly, right? He says, I find this law at work. When I try to do good, evil is right there with me. Boom. How do you like that? How do you like that? How do you like the humility of this champion of the work of God. This guy, the Apostle Paul was they have said that it has been said that in terms of the literature and the volume of writing, the Apostle Paul is the hero of the New Testament. I mean, he wrote like a lot of the New Testament. And of course, in real life, this guy would be like Johnny Cochran. I mean, he'd be like John Roberts, you know, the head of the Supreme Court, whatever that position is called, the Supreme Chair of the Supreme Court. No, I can't remember, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, he was like the best lawyer, one of the best lawyers, most powerful lawyers. I mean, he rode around on a horse and was killing Christians left and right. I mean, this was a powerful, successful man, you know. And yet, when have you ever heard, right? I can't remember the last time I heard a preacher say something that had that degree of transparency and vulnerability and humility. You know? I mean, Apostle Paul you got to think about this. He went from riding around horseback town to town killing Christians, and he wasn't even a Roman. He wasn't even